For Jains, Athavira is not the founder of the religion. Actually, he's the 24th in this line of perfected teachers, people who are called Tirthankaras. Uh, the word means crossing makers. When you need to cross a river or a stream, you need to find a place that you can go through the stream without being washed away. And the idea of these 24 Tirthankaras is that they found that way. They're not the way, like Jesus. They're not the ones who are going to rescue you and somehow get you across the river. They're going to show you the right way to cross. They're examples. They are perfected teachers. And they themselves, at the point of death, go on to be absorbed, or to, in a sense, to rise to the top of the Jain, what we would think of as heaven. And so even as we've talked about who they are in the person of Athavira, Athavira undoubtedly was someone who essentially reformed and organized what had been an ancient religion in India. And he was the last of the great 24 teachers for this age. Now, in India, there are not all that many Jains compared to other major world religions, perhaps a few million Jains. But that doesn't bother them, because they believe in the same process that Hinduism teaches, that the earth and the world is going through this cycle. And the initial cycle is one of morality, and then it reaches a peak, and then it begins to go downhill. But eventually, the world will fall into chaos, and then it will be recreated. Now, they don't see this as happening as the result of a god or a creator god. In fact, of all of the world religions, Jainism is perhaps the most explicitly atheistic. They don't believe in God. They believe that they believe in karma. They believe things happen as a result of natural law. And so they have nothing to teach about God, because they simply reject the idea of God. Here's what one textbook says concerning this. Jainism offers the following philosophical arguments. If God is perfect, why did God create a universe that is imperfect? If God made the universe because of love, why is the world so full of suffering beings? If the universe had to be created, did not God also need to be created? And where did God come from in the beginning? Jainism teaches that the universe is eternal. It's always existed, and it goes through these cycles. And so we're in a certain cycle, and the fact that there are few Jains today, they would say, is just to be expected. And eventually, after the collapse comes, and then the world is kind of recreated, there'll be new Tirthankaras to help us begin to deal with that, and we'll see the number of true believers go up. But the fact is that Jainism represents kind of the extreme response to the kind of questions that Hinduism was trying to address. Buddhism is sometimes called the middle way, because it proposes some of the same solutions, but in less extreme ways. For the Jains, only a few people can eventually make it to moksha. The path is so difficult, so extreme. And again, it involves meditation, and it involves self-renunciation and self-mortification, pain and self-denial. And the only people for whom that's even vaguely accessible would be the monks. Now, in point of fact, Jains are divided into at least three major groups. And I'm not going to give you the names of those groups. They're long and they're difficult, and I don't think you need to know them. But the fact is that one of the groups was the group that was most like Mahavira. He eventually went to southern India. He founded this group of sky-clad monks, meaning that they went around naked, and they still have that. That's a major sect today. Now, they don't practice perhaps the nakedness maybe as openly as they did during his time, but it's still a practice. There was a group that stayed behind in northern India, and that group became the white-clad monks. The white-clad, they would argue it was appropriate for them to put on a white robe because of the fact of the northern India being much colder, for one thing, and just in general, they felt like this was an accommodation that was allowed by the teachings of the master, Athavira. And so they broke over this. And there have been other aspects of the differences that still exist today. For instance, the northern group that allows white monks, they have nuns who practice the religious faith as well, whereas in the South they will not allow women to be nuns. They say that for them to adopt the monastic lifestyle, they first have to be reincarnated as a man, similar to what Hinduism generally teaches. So we see some of the differences. There was a third group that grew up that was a reform movement of the group that were the white-clad monks, and they have only been around a few hundred years, which sounds like a long time, but in terms of the history of this particular world religion, it's not. And that group became concerned that the Jains they knew had adopted many practices out of Hinduism. So they had by this time built Jain temples, and they created huge statues. But instead of having statues of the gods like you would have in Hinduism, they had statues of the Tirthankaras, these great master teachers. And they had also adopted a practice of doing puja, of bringing devotional offerings before the various statues. And so you can see pictures of Jains where they're washing, they're bathing the statues. And the reform group felt that this was inappropriate. We don't believe in God. We shouldn't be worshiping human images and so on. And that was where they kind of broke off of the white-clad monks. What unites Jains is their ethical practices, their lifestyle. And there are 5 things that Jains try to practice. The first of these is called ahimsa. And ahimsa is also practiced within Hinduism and Buddhism. It's the idea of harmlessness, or it's sometimes called nonviolence. But you'll occasionally see a picture of a Jain monk, and he's got in front of him a broom, and he's sweeping in front of him. That's because he's trying to imitate the practice of Ahavira, to not in any way harm any living creature, like so you wouldn't step on an ant or something. Harmlessness. And That's also one of the reasons that Jains are strict vegetarians. It's one of the reasons that they do not generally engage in any kind of occupation that could potentially harm another living being. And as a result, Jains have become professionals in Indian society. They've become doctors and lawyers and engineers, and they're well accepted in Indian society, I think, because they fit into, in many ways, the Indian caste system. So even though they are officially Jains instead of Hindus, they kind of fit into the Indian lifestyle. So they're synthesized into this Hindu way of life. Ahimsa is the first of the ethical practices. The second one is non-lying or truthfulness. And again, Jains are highly respected in Indian society for honoring their word, for keeping their promises, for being careful about what they say, and for fulfilling contracts. And that, again, has earned them a great deal of respect. They don't believe in that you can know ultimate truth because they say that that's just beyond our ability, but they are very careful in their speech. And then non-stealing is another one of their ethical practices. What's yours is yours, but don't steal from someone else. Chastity is one of their is the sexual ethical practice, and so the monks and the nuns are celibate, but they understand that that's not going to be realistic for lay people, and that you adapt to where people are. And so what that means for the lay person is that if they're married, they will be sexually faithful to their partner. That's the emphasis on chastity. And then the final one is detachment. And Arthur Vera understood that there are many things in life, things like sex, or things like pleasure, things like money and possessions that people almost become addicted to. And so the goal was to learn to detach yourself from these worldly concerns. And you can, again, you would do that through either meditation or through bodily self-denial. Those are the main things. So Jainism is an ancient religion. It's a religion that focuses not on theology, because that would imply the existence of God, but it is a religion that looks like Hinduism to try and overcome the cycle of karma, and therefore to achieve a kind of moksha, a liberation from this life. And that is Jainism.